Hello, everyone, and welcome. Sorry, a bit of slow internet there. Welcome to the Iron Canon podcast, your home on Star Wars Underworld podcast for an in-depth discussion on the lore, the High Republic, and the whole canon of the galaxy far, far away. My name is Matthew, and I'm coming from the Underworld North studio here in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. As always, I am joined across the continent by your friend and mine, Mr. Joel Davis. Joel, how are you doing this week?
Could be better. Got a little bit of a cold. But this is my third day, so I'm recovering. But definitely better than I was a couple days ago when I was worried. Oh, am I gonna be able to do the podcast? So
Yeah.
definitely made it for tonight.
There we go. The show goes on. The show goes on. Glad to be back. Glad that you're back and you're up and ready to go. This week Spotlight continues with a truly great moment in Canon Comics. Kieron Gillen's climactic Hope Dies arc from that 2015 ongoing run. It set the story on a beeline to The Empire Strikes Back and a beeline into our hearts. And to help us out, talk about it, we got a guest. We got Red Leader, first time on the pod. Welcome to the Ion Canon podcast, Red Leader.
Hey.
All right, fair enough. Good that you're there. Good to know you're there. The plugs they're out of the way. You can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Threads at Iron Canon Pod, EYEONCANONPOD. Not so much going on Twitter or Threads, but Instagram. I mean, yeah, we'll see. I'll get to the potential source of new content coming up soon. Also, here on the Underworld YouTube channel, we got memberships and super chats, and of course, YouTube, Facebook, or Underworld Facebook, Iron Canon Twitch, Underworld Twitter, Iron Canon Twitter. All those different places you can watch us and check us out. Also, Spotify and Apple Podcasts. I think I'm able to upload from this computer. We'll see what happens. I know the Tractor Beam, which I'll get to in a second, that's kind of behind on my uploads, but I'll get to that when I can. We got also the Underworld Discord server. Joel, what's happening in the Discord?
Nothing much this week. Last week we had a great Fortnite game. That was always fun. And of course, this is again, I'm going to only mention it was one time because I think that's fine. But of course, you can always join us Thursday. I'll mention this once, where we have our final Ahsoka discussion, to where we all gather in the voice chat and talk about the season. So this will be our last episode, and hopefully, of course, with negotiations ongoing, the actors can get the deal they deserve, and we can all hopefully start talking about it online. But obviously, that deal.
Yeah, that conversation. I would like to chime in and jump into that one. This past Thursday, it's basically just people as if we're hanging out in person, chatting. So you have to come into the Discord server. So the link is in the description below if you want to just come in and chat. We're not, it's not kind of public content for consumption. It's not recorded. None of that. We still want to make sure that the Screen Actors Guild has the leverage they need to get a fair deal. But that show is just too good that we gotta talk about it somehow, somewhere. So that's what we do. That's how we do it. Speaking of talking about stuff, talking about stories that are not struck. Comics, and this is gonna be relevant for this week. If you love Star Wars comics, welcome to this episode of Iron Canon. Every Thursday at 12:15 Eastern Time, 9:15 a.m. Pacific. Grab your lunch, grab your breakfast. Chris Abbott and I are talking about comic books and just the comic books that had come out the day before. Sorry, really diving into the Dark Droids crossover. It's giving us a lot of great stuff to talk about, to think about, and also, again, so this coming up, I believe it's Bounty Hunters number 39 and Vader number 39. I believe that's right. Chris and I we're sizzling, we're cooking some good comic book steak there. Just thinking about where Tractor Beam might go and how it might as I move on. All right, I'm okay. I'm alive.
You're getting my cold.
Joel, I'm catching your thing, whatever. There you go. So check out the Tractor Beam right here on the Underworld channel, 12:15 Eastern Time, 9:15 a.m. Pacific on Thursdays. Grab your lunch, grab your comics, and enjoy. Okay, one thing to take a swig of water first of all. I'll put this up before we go into just our show and just our Star Wars content specifically. I do want to make a note. So today I actually had the day off from work because on Saturday was National Truth and Reconciliation Day here in Canada, and we've talked about Indigenous issues, Indigenous, the way Star Wars, broaches Indigenous concerns of imperialism, colonization. Before, I wanted to just make a special note of, um, the struggle and the suffering and the oppression that Indigenous communities here in Canada continue to face. It is a little maybe ironic, maybe just sad that the federal government can have a national day for truth and reconciliation, but what are they doing for the sake of truth and reconciliation generally? Still, Indigenous communities without clean water, without access to mental health resources, without access to education, jobs that they need and deserve to really contribute to their communities and their societies. So much Indigenous excellence, so much Indigenous resilience that we've seen, especially over the last few years, when the terror and the horror of unmarked grave in residential schools was being exposed and brought to light. We kind of knew that was the case before, but now it's the horror of that and the horror of the residential schools is hitting us afresh. And so, we talk about each country. We have an original sin. I'd say it's fair to say in the U.S. it's slavery. Canada, we have our anti-black racism too, but our original sin is the residential schools and the way we committed cultural genocide on the Indigenous population here. And so, yeah, it's important to take a day to mark that, to remember, Canada is not this clean, hunky-dory, lily white country that we pretend to be. We have a lot of things going for us, a lot of good things going for us. I'm grateful. Grateful to be in a country where the healthcare, whatever, the education, the resources that I have, in part because of being Canadian, the passport throughout the world, but also it's helpful to remember we if we want to be the beacon of hope and truth and justice in the world, and collaboration and cooperation throughout the world, we have to also clean up our house at home, and by that I mean changing the table. It's not just our home. Our home is on native land, and these nations. We made a treaty with these nations. The British imperial government made a treaty with these nations. We need to find ways of honoring that treaty, those treaties, ways that develop and support communities in the present, and that's the most important in moving towards the future. And so, Truth and Reconciliation Day, we remember the truth of it. We ask forgiveness, and we seek, it's not just justice in a mechanistic, purely what's a retributive way. It's genuine reconciliation and hope. And I'm constantly inspired by the many Indigenous communities and Indigenous leaders and elders who continue to show resilience and courage and hope for their communities and for everyone within this sort of Westphalian border thing we call Canada. I actually am hopeful for the future. And speaking of from my church background, hopeful for my church and what we were the state church, the Anglican Church of Canada, the Church of England, the state church, and yet there are Indigenous Anglicans who, despite everything, still want to worship and pray with us, and so grateful for that. Okay, that's I think.
If I may,
yeah, go ahead.
And one thing with Indigenous issues in Canada, connected to that it goes beyond Canada's border even as well, because what often gets overlooked is Canada has a lot of mining interests in Latin America, and a lot of
Africa, and
and there's a lot of Indigenous land that you will, if you pay attention to news stories coming out of especially the like Horn of South America, out of Peru. Well, Peru's not the Horn, but no, it's in Peru. It was in Chile. Was an issue consistently, and Argentina in particular. That there will be pretty frequent massacres or forced removal of Indigenous people for companies that are majority owned by Canada. Some are state involved as well, that it is very much a larger thing, and a lot of indigenous people between both continents have a lot of solidarity there and a lot of interacting. It's very important, and keeping that fight for people who still are on their land, to hold on.
Yeah, that's a great point. And another thing, if we want to practice what we preach and continue to push for in our global policy, that we're Canadian multinationals are particularly egregious. And so again, but I mean, I do want to not to downplay the darkness and the evil, but say that this is coming to light, and there is hope, because people are risking their lives and their welfare to speak up and to act. And you talk about solidarity between communities and between nations. It doesn't start in Ottawa, but Ottawa has to listen, and so hopefully that can move, and that needle can move. So again, rather a great point there. Okay, I think we can move on. Obviously never move on, but
now to nerd stuff.
Nerd stuff. I mean, I'm sure some of this stuff will come back to us, but on that note, Star Wars. Our week in Star Wars. Joel, you have some thoughts on creative centralization.
Yeah, funny enough, this was actually something, and I don't know if I'm misconstruing, or if you remember this conversation we had read during the Andor discussion. We said a lot during those talks, which were fun. Kind of I kind of forget how I put it. Sort of like the odd limitations of canon, because that's what we call our podcast. Is called Eye on Canon. I've talked about the last few days of how, like, I think every author in Star Wars, be they a screen or book author, had like a little personal canon to them, how the world works and whatnot. I forget your point you were trying to make, Red, during that conversation, and I don't know if you remember. It's been a while, but something along the lines of, you wondered how much, when we were watching Andor, how much Tony Gilroy was kind of like feeling like, in some ways, he was adding all these interesting themes and ideas to Star Wars, but in some way he felt a little locked-handled, because ultimately, at the end of the day, he's got to tie it to the original trilogy and everything that comes after it. I kind of forget the point you were trying to make, and I apologize if you don't remember either. Again, it was been so long. But yeah, I was thinking about that, and like, I do wonder if certain of these themes that the shows and the books do ultimately sometimes get undercut, because ultimately Star Wars isn't a centralized creative endeavor. It is very decentralized in some ways. Like, if Tim Zahn has this big old plan for Mr. Thrawn about the Grisk and all whatnot, like, I kind of doubt Filoni doesn't care about that too much. Or if how much can Tony Gilroy with Andor kind of add the nuances of, sort of the rebellion and the various factions that make it up the rebellion at the end of the day, when ultimately, Return of the Jedi has ultimately been decided upon 30 years ago. And I just wonder if, like, those limitations of canon, I just think about that in terms of, like, we love our canon, we love our connections, we love this fact that this is a singular universe. But I do wonder sometimes, like, how, you can only push so far before ultimately you, not maybe necessarily go to status quo, but you do kind of have to make that beeline to the thing that's already been established. We'll see a little bit since Hope dies. Ultimately, this is the beeline to Empire. Rogue One and Andor, the beeline to A New Hope. And yeah, that was just my thought. I probably had more to say when I was thinking about this. And Brett, do you remember what we were talking about that day? I don't know.
I can't remember with Andor, though I know this is definitely a topic the two of us have talked about on various podcasts, on various channels, probably going as far back as, like, the lead up to Rogue One.
We've been friends for a while, folks.
Yeah, and this has been a conversation since like Rebels was starting to hint towards Rogue One in the lead up to that. And looking back at these issues, which are pretty recent relatively, and the significance of Rogue One elements starting to be incorporated into the comics, not just in hints, but like actively talking about it as a thing that we all know happened. So now we can be free about that.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely something that's changed throughout canon. There have been points where, something like Rogue One, not knowing that story yet, didn't feel limiting really. And once we got it, there wasn't necessarily anything, I would say, that's been hamstrung or felt like, oh, this is disappointing because I know where this is going. In the same way that I think, as much as I enjoy some of these stories, a lot of the stuff for the tie-ins to the sequel trilogy sadly did feel hamstrung, in the sense that you could tell the writer got like one or two notes of
Aftermath 1, Aftermath 1.
Yep.
And
Of like
Bloodline too.
Yeah, Bloodline is a big case of like really good story, but it is clearly trying to make its own full story and its own piece within within the universe, while also not knowing where anything's going really, and not knowing what happened previously. And so there's so much piecing together that ends up happening, where it's not just the continuity for us, but also like, I mean, it didn't factor as much of a problem in Bloodline, but still there was always that thing of like, so is Ben dark side yet? Is he fallen? Has Snoke done all this stuff that we kind of, there's elements of the characters that it's like, this might be very significantly weighing on Leia right now, or not. We don't know.
I think I remember what your point might have been. I think we were talking about, it was during the Saw Gerrera episode. I feel like, again, if I'm misconstruing your words, I'm sorry, with a long time. I think we're both trying to remember. But something about like how you can make an argument that Andor and Rogue One kind of are, building this case up for Saw and his group. And, that's a whole other debate in itself. But you feel like the repercussions of sort of Saw's point of view are never really going to be tackled within the aftermath. Because ultimately, Return of the Jedi is very, sort of like if Tony Gilroy is like, say, pro Saw Gerrera in like whatever the viewpoint is, it's kind of hard to say that the rest of Star Wars is pro Saw Gerrera, because ultimately Tony Gilroy's not writing all of Star Wars. He's just writing this little teeny tiny sliced pie. I think, Red, that was like, feel free for it to continue if I interrupted or your train.
Oh yeah, sorry, go ahead, Red. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was it. That we know, obviously, the partisans in the comics do kind of continue, but yeah, they were. We know from Rogue One and A New Hope that Saw was correct with all his paranoia and what they were building. Rebels, I think, does probably the best job with its second two-parter. Was In the Name of the Rebellion and whatever the other episode of that was.
I think it was just In the Name of Rebellion, part 1 and 2.
Oh yeah, I think
that sounds about right. Yeah,
but that, I think, maybe does the best job out of anything of alluding to that, of like, hey, we know where this is. Not only we know where this is going, but the story sort of thematically, the what it's trying to say is hinging upon the fact that you know where this is going, in a way that the characters can take away a thing of, hey, this is maybe a bit too extreme, or maybe Ezra needs to calm down with the dark side stuff. And also, Saw is vindicated, and the episode clearly knows that about this is building to the Death Star. And so that kind of gives the advantages of knowing where some stuff is going. I don't think Rogue One hamstrung anything. Instead, it made stuff stronger. Whereas, again, with the sequel trilogy, and maybe part of that's more because there wasn't as much of a clear plan, but like, you definitely had tie-in material that has a limited amount of what it knows. Of like, it's clear that Rise of the Resistance was told
Resistance Reborn, you mean?
Oh yeah, Resistance Reborn.
Yeah.
They were told there's the Tantive 4 is back.
Yeah.
And that's about it. And build around that. And that was the note.
So, I mean, this gets at a lot of things. The thing we talk about a lot on this podcast is, the relationship between paper and screen, and when, and especially the question of tie-in materials versus paper canon stories generally, and this is why the best paper canon stories are the ones that aren't as much in reference to films or TV shows. I mean, there haven't been any reference to TV shows, but that they just can do whatever they want, or in reference to, say, my favorite novel is sort of in reference to a film that came out in 1999. Master and Apprentice. We know everything that happens already. Let's go back and tell a different story a few years earlier that kind of informs, maybe extrapolates character growth and character development and relationship between Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon, from a few years before. That at their best, so the ones that are just completely standalone or completely just a good time away from that. Paper stories at their best can really dig into a character moment and just explore, okay, what happens if we put these characters in this scenario, in this circumstance. And then, yes, there are things, and as we're going to get to, there are kind of beats, maybe in backstory or in development that, from, say, A New Hope to Empire Strikes Back, there are some things that needed to have happened that we know have happened. The challenge then is, can Kieron Gillen or Charles Soule or Claudia Gray or whoever, or Adam Christopher, tell that in a compelling way. And James Luceno, here's a great example, right? I mean, that, again, we've talked about how Catalyst is the perfect tie-in novel because it's able to actually take this question that in a film that we haven't fully seen yet. I will write it before Rogue One came out. How do we get to the beginning of Rogue One? What is, how do we get from the Clone Wars to the beginning of Rogue One, right? How do we get to the Death Star is in existence, and it has developed this kyber technology, and who are the people involved in that, right? Who is this Krennic guy? Who is this Galen Erso guy, right? Who is Jin, and as a little kid, right? And so, does it help or hurt when, I guess it's the question, really the question is, when you have to actually get to a point. And I'd say it's just a unique challenge to actually get there while making, get there in a story that is still gripping and compelling. So, that's why I'm going to get, I could jump into my own, I'll get there in a second, but I don't know if you guys have any further thoughts on that one.
That was just my thought of the week.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'll get to one. Here's another example. Phase 1 ends. High Republic Phase 1 ends. The way it does, and with Markian off, this guy off on his own doing his thing. Let's see. I can get him this side. I can point to him. And the leveler and the nameless and those ugly beasts are on their prowl, and we gotta know, what are they, what's happening there. I'm about halfway through Path of Vengeance is what I'm going to say here, and I promise I will have Phase 2 finished soon. But I'm finding Path of Vengeance really, really interesting, really intriguing. A lot more for Yana to do as a character. Even though Marta had more to do in Path of Deceit, Yana has more to do in Path of Vengeance. We know they're looking for the eggs on Planet X. That's a bit of a spoiler, sorry, Joel. But yeah, so
I won't remember. Don't worry.
That's okay. So just to say, I've loved the way Phase 2 has set up, not just set up Phase 3, but for what we know about the Nile, but informed what we've known from phase 1 about the Nile, and they are of these origins in this peaceable farming commune with this weird kind of self-interested mother who we don't know. I mean, she uses very flowery language, but Marta, the flower girl, really believes it, and how she becomes great grandmother to this guy. Yeah, just to see how she gets radicalized. I'm convinced Marta is Mark Ewan's ancestor, and that she is the origin of the Nile. And I think I've located a point in Path of Vengeance where the Nile are born in Marta's own heart, in Marta's own soul, and it's actually a fun, exciting moment. So I won't spoil anything else. That's all I'll say there. Vengeance in New York. I've said this a few times. Yeah, I'm going to New York Comic Con. It's in is it a week from? Is it a week? Is a week from this Thursday? Yes, I can do math. I'm going to be flying to New York a week from yesterday, so that's exciting. But yeah, going to New York Comic Con. The tractor beam will be assembled at New York Comic Con. Chris Abbott and I will be doing some probably at least making some comments and chatting about different panels, especially the Lucasfilm Publishing panel. We'll both be at that, and definitely looking forward to that. You're going to have to talk about what kind of content what we do over at Star Raptors channel on the Star Raptors channel, and what we do on this channel. Sort things out, some things out, but definitely Instagram at Iron Cannon Pod. I think I'll post some things depending. Again, that's another big question. Is I keep pointing over here. I think it's the point over here. How about pointing at Star Wars? No, I'm just kidding. Coruscant Guard. No. Depending on the strike. I mean, so the writer's strike. So we've changed that. The writer's strike is over. Thankfully, they got a very fair deal, a very great deal. Here's hoping that the actors' strike is over in time for Ewan McGregor to actually talk about Star Wars, for Chris Evans to talk about Marvel. That would be something. And for us to be able to talk more about just all of the canon together, and that's been the challenge. There we go, Joel, with your shirt. That's been the challenge, but hopefully it's in time for the largest con on North American soil, and so definitely looking forward to that. Read any of High Republic yet, or how far are you into High Republic?
I dropped out of following EU stuff actively like right before, so I've missed out on all of the High Republic stuff, and it's not something that I guess can be jumped into easily.
You could probably pick something. Pick up Light of the Jedi or Into the Dark.
Yeah, it's a little hard.
Yeah, fair. But okay, that's fair enough. I mean, yeah, I think. Well, that's interesting to know because we talk about central creatives and needing to get to hit a certain beat somewhere. Again, they literally sat in a room and hashed all this out together, and then they went off and did their things, and it's still talking on Slack and everything. So it's. I mean, I'm still. Is it still my favorite thing in Star Wars? I think tomorrow night might change that a little bit, but that's which is surprising. I didn't expect that. So come on, writers, come on, actors, get a good deal here. So you talk about, but yeah, New York Comic Con, just seeing Path of Vengeance, New York Comic Con. Joel, I mean, you've done the first part of Phase 2, right? Like you did Path of Deceit.
I just have to read Path of Vengeance and like the mission to Planet X thing.
Oh, Quest for Planet X, yeah.
I read all Phase 2, and I pretty much didn't read anything of Phase 1 practically, but I thankfully kept up.
You read a good chunk of it. You read a good chunk of it.
But yeah, so I gotta just read Path of Vengeance. I will. I'll get to it. Yeah. I mean, I think I've enjoyed Phase 2 a lot more than Phase 1. Only because I felt it was more slimmed, and I was able to remember more of the characters.
Yeah.
And I do think the Path of the Open Hand are an interesting are they a Force sect? I might guess they're a Force sect. They like the Force.
Yeah,
they don't hate the Force. They just don't like people using it.
They're gathered around an opinion about the Force.
Totally. So curious how they become basically marauders. So So yeah, I'll definitely have to check it out, and then we can do a phase 2 look back.
Right on. Yes, and when we finish all that, definitely be able to talk about it more. I've been a little slow. I'm grateful phase 3 is going to be spread out, so that hopefully will include a lot more people, welcome a lot more people. I think, and I was just chatting with Dom about this today. Because it's more spread out, I wonder if the stories are going to be more linearly connected as opposed to just interspersed, intermeshed, if that makes sense. So part of the concern he was addressing was that with say Cataclysm and Path of Vengeance both happen at the same time. Quest for Planet X, at least the last third of Path of Vengeance happens at the same time as Cataclysm, and that's just harder to keep track of and harder to just feel the weight of those stories. I think for some people, I don't necessarily have the same experience, but a lot of people do. I wonder if part of the lesson in stringing it out longer and making more of a gap between stories is that they'll have to, because we'll have to go back and remember what happens and whatnot. So, it should be. It should be. I'm looking forward to phase 3, especially everything that's so interesting about phase 2 coming into phase 3. So that should be good. Get to a few comments here. These are Sith series. Well, first of all, we will. Don't worry.
Oh, where I'm talking. I just been keeping myself on mute because I've been cold. So.
Yeah, you're a bit under the weather, but yeah, you'll have things to say, I'm sure. The Sith series. Yeah, I'm interesting. I'm curious about when it's. There's gonna be a Sith TV show when the actors get a fair deal. That we'll definitely do a lot more coverage on. So, looking forward to that. Hopefully, eventually.
Yeah, I'm very excited to see, because not having consumed any of the High Republic stuff, part of what I've been very eager for is I don't have the PS5 to play it, but like playing Jedi Survivor and watching Acolyte as someone who's very into Star Wars and in EU stuff, but doesn't know High Republic.
Yeah,
I'm very curious to see how that's gonna hold up, how good of tie and stuff that's gonna be.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's related to a lot of conversations about the current streaming show. If you haven't seen Rebels, what's that like for you? And it's actually probably not as bad as people think. I will say, you might be. I mean, it's Jedi Survivor. It's more of just a fun nod.
Mm-hmm.
It's more interesting. Yeah, I'm very curious. Yeah, definitely. I mean, Leslie Headland, she's being clear. This ties in. This has a lot to do, and so the excitement around it. I got excited by Thrawn. I hadn't read the Tim Zahn trilogy. I got excited about Thrawn and Rebels. So, yeah, I'll be curious. I got to remember to ask you about that when that show comes on. What's that like? Because that's going to be a big question for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
Again, similar to what we're asking now. What's it like without having read High Republic? It's going to be very different, I gather. Is it going to be better? Is it going to be necessarily worse? But yeah, that's a fascinating question.
Especially because I mean, I know we're. Yeah, I'm playing loose with the rule anyway. Like I've talked before about how, is how tied into the narrative of High Republic. Like, I don't expect there to be Marcion and, the Nile probably have already been dealt with. I feel like just in terms of the timeline, maybe maybe obviously we do know some characters might pop up, elder species and whatnot, but it's are the main human Jedi going to be there? The aesthetic I think is going to be there, which I'm excited for. That the kind of past but not past kind of the gold robes,
which is also in Survivor, right?
Right, they got the gold robes, so Red, if we'll have to have you on for Acolyte, trying to get the non-High Republic book person to kind of get their opinion on. That'd be great to know.
Yeah, because I'm fascinated by whatever is going through the minds of Star Wars fans who didn't watch Rebels when all of this stuff is happening. Ahsoka, not just Thrawn, but Sabine and Hera.
Yeah,
it'll be interesting to be on the other side of that for once.
Yeah. Fun times. Again, hopefully, again, the actors getting it for they're meeting this week, right? So
They met today,
they met
and I just
today.
got word they're going to meet Wednesday. So tomorrow we're
That's-
taking a break, and Wednesday they're going to meet again.
It's a sign. It's a sign. Some good time. Again, I'm all. Is it not selfish? Just self. Hey, I want to go to New York and enjoy these panels. You know what I mean? Fan Expo Canada was interesting for that. So, but yeah, obviously for all of us to be able to talk about this, but most importantly, yeah, I mean the writers got a fair deal, got a more than an incredible deal. So the tactic works. I think it's disruptive, but there's a reason why people do it. Protesting does it, or strikes work. Anyway, so after all that, let's dive right in to our main topic. Great moments in Paper Canon. Hope dies. Very sad, sad name, but not so much a sad outcome, but there's a risk. There's the risk there. First off, I'll set it up and then I'll turn it over to you. But I will on the way, Joel. I'll ask both you and Ed some trip down memory lane. So let's embark on a trip down memory lane to July to October 2018, or however you may have read it. I guess the collected edition may have come out in November or December. I don't quite remember.
Joel, did you read this time around? Did you read it in the vault in the trade, or?
I do see. This is funny. I knew I put the question in, but I put the question in not remembering much. I'm sorry.
Sure.
I remember we were excited because it was Gillen was on the main run, so I remember like that. I think we were reading at least a little bit weekly before I kind of dropped off.
How about this past?
This time
to prep it.
Oh, this time? Oh, yeah, I read it on trade, so I kind of read the whole thing. So all at once.
I'm pretty sure you have all of these issues actually digitally.
Probably somewhere.
Because for people who weren't reading in singles at the time, Marvel, because they were charging $6, well, $6 for the first issue, but everything else was $4. Back then, and I believe they still do this, though I think they've also lowered some of the prices, thankfully. Don't quote me on that. But they would have a digital code in every issue.
Okay, so I'll just dive in there because I do want to lay some things out, and then we can get into that. First of all, everything has a digital. Every Marvel single issue has a digital code. By and large, there was a good chunk in there where they didn't, and we all got up in arms. So yeah, Joe, you might have the digital code. Red, I don't know what you have. I don't want to I just don't want to derail the conversation. But keep going.
Just back when I was actively reading comics, any digital codes I had, I would send to Joel.
Okay,
so kind of... all my Star Wars comics, like I know if the sticker then is pulled off, because then I'm like, oh yeah, right. And all the struggles of accidentally pulling off the ink and us having to figure out.
I complain whenever it's too stuck. This is what you do: is you go help marvel.com/redeem help and complain, and they send you a code. Just putting that out there. The code system is kind of wonky. Sometimes you have to take a photo and send it in. It's kind of that.
Lots of trial and error. But I was just wondering about that because I when reading through saw the stickers being pulled off.
Yeah, fair enough. Anyway, so okay, it's a good sidebar because the way we read these comics does make a difference with the collected editions versus single issues. I had my single issues. I dug them out because I moved and have organized all my single issues. So here they are. From 2018, they're not worth that much, so I'm not too worried about pulling them out. But there we go. But let's take this trip to memory lane back to July to October 2018. So this was for the Star Wars ongoing 2015 run, numbers 50 to 55, and tomorrow actually marks 5 years since issue number 55 came out. So it's great timing. October 3rd, 2018. Written by Kieron Gillen, art by Salvador LaRocca with a bit of Giuseppe Camuncoli, Colors by Guru EFX. The directed edition covers are by various artists. Here's the early iconic cover. You can't see that very well.
That one I always remember.
Yeah. So I even got a second printing. I forget who this is by, so I'm just going to open this up just to remind myself. So I meant to write this down. Travis Charest wrote this very iconic cover. I had this, or I think Captain America #1 by Ta-Nehisi Coates came up the same day. So that's just another little note there. One of my favorite comic book runs of all time. By the way, Captain America by Ta-Nehisi Coates. Anyway, Star Wars ongoing. Yeah, so going back this time, Star Wars in 2018. We're going to talk about Screen. We talked about Screen quite a bit here. So just to note, the Rebels series finale aired on March 5th. Solo aired May 25th. And so that's kind of in the background in our minds. Rogue One was, of course, 2016. Last Jedi 2017.
You're forgetting also, don't forget Star Wars Resistance. Oh, yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, that was 2018 too.
Yes. The series that are relevant to this show, Rebels and Solo.
It's always relevant.
Yes, that's fair. Sorry.
It should be relevant.
Sorry, Resistance
Love
is
that
always
thing.
relevant. And at this time, comics now in 2018 started adding more to things from Solo and from Rogue One. For example, Han chatting with Two-Tubes, saying how they've changed. Hope Dies explicitly mentioning Rogue One and Jyn Erso and the events there. And of course, we have General Dre. We'll get to him. We'll get to everything with Jyn coming up. Kieron Gillen had taken over the ongoing run just a year earlier, just under a year earlier, starting with issue number 38 in fall of 2017. And thank the Force, because so the Jason Aaron's time on the ongoing run, it started strong, had some really great moments, but towards kind of 34, even earlier, it really started, I think, to falter and just, where is this going? What is this doing? Kind of biding time before we make this beeline, as I said, to Empire Strikes Back. And Kieron Gillen, who had finished his Darth Vader run, came in, took over the ongoing run, and Hope Dies then represents the turning point in this Rebellion Rising story. We'll get to that in a little bit. But also, again, it's the beeline for Empire Strikes Back. It's the Empire at its height, but the Rebellion gaining steam. Immediately preceding this was, preceding Hope Dies, was the Mutiny of Mon Cala arc, which this fantastic run, fantastic arc, fantastic storyline. We'll get to that just in a little bit with kind of the state of the Rebellion at the time. But yeah, and of course, I consider the Mon Cala arc this kind of multi-era crossover. It's the first time Marvel Comics doesn't really do this. It wasn't intentional, but with Charles Soule's 2017 Charles Soule's Vader comic at the same time, they were looking at everything with Lee Char just after Revenge of the Sith. Lee Char, of course, in this arc, in the ongoing, he's in a coma. The Empire is presenting their plunger into Mon Cala and trying to flush them out. Sorry. But yeah, and there's a really gripping epic story over both these issues, both these runs. And yeah, it's really time, it's been 2.5-3 years into the Canon comics after the Disney changeover, really starting to come into their own, really starting to make their mark for comic readers, make their mark for Star Wars fans. I should check the numbers. I wonder if John Jackson Miller's numbers on sales in this era, I wouldn't be surprised if they were at their peak. If they were, I mean, I'm sure they've been eclipsed now, but it really is a high water mark for Canon Comics, both where the ongoing run was and the 2017 run was. So, Joel, I'll throw this one to you. What do you remember of? Because you were about to get into it. You remember reading this in 2018, and what you thought of it then?
Yeah, I remember. When you said flush them out, I'm just like have this impression of Vader's fleet going over. Vader's like, deploy the plungers.
Yeah.
Um,
That's what I was going for.
But no, actually, you reminded me, Seth. Thank you for reminding me. Yeah, this was also the Mon Cala arc had just happened. I remember just like this cool era of like, oh yeah, Charles Soule's doing his thing, and that's like Vader 30 years later beforehand. And you know the mainline comic was doing the Mon Cala arc, and it's like this is cool past and present thing. Also, we also got to see Admiral Raddus in the past before Rogue One, which is also cool. Remember that? But I think Raddus gets mentioned in the Mon Cala arc in the main line. I don't remember. But anyway, yeah, I remember just this era, and it's like I felt like now that Rogue One and Solo have sort of hit, we were starting to finally see that stuff integrated more into, I guess, the original trilogy era quite a lot. You know, we saw it with Rebels, obviously, like you mentioned, quite a bit, and just kind of seeing, you know, just sort of those things from Rogue One get addressed and like why they're not around anymore. Which is interesting because there's actually a bit of a retcon kind of situation with a source book thing, which we'll get into later. The Rebel Files, if anybody had those were good. But neither here nor there. And I just remember kind of seeing this cool, like the Rebel Alliance is finally solidifying itself, only to then get a big pounding. Like, dang, no wonder it's called Hope Dies. But yeah, I remember that, and it was just really, really cool. And obviously, the death of Draven, like why was Draven not around? Cool that he kind of got some closure, I guess, or at least he got to do something. That was cool. But yeah, I remember just reading it, and just what an interesting time. It was an interesting time.
It was a great time. Red, do you remember reading this? Were you reading it issued month to month, or how were you reading it, and what do you remember about this arc and reading this arc?
Yeah, I had initially not been really sold on Jason Aaron's run. I like Jason Aaron generally with comics, but I felt like his Star Wars stuff felt unfocused in a lot of ways.
Good word for it, yeah.
It simultaneously was stuck in sort of that early Marvel Star Wars, like back in the day stuff, where it would kind of be more like a normal Marvel comic of the time, which makes sense because Star Wars stuff wasn't established yet, but also was afraid to do what a lot of those Marvel comics did, where they did kind of build a more consistent story where you would have like, you can track what base they have throughout the entirety of the old Marvel run, which is very fun, like stuff like that. There was always sort of a disconnect, where it's just Han, Luke, and Leia go off on some wacky adventure, which is fun, but then there would also be big moments that you'd be like, oh wait, how did we get here? And Gillen coming onto the title, and I'd started picking up in singles the tail end of Aaron's run. I'd read the rest in trade earlier, but because of Gillen, who I'd absolutely loved on Vader, I was very, very excited. And once we heard the Partisans were going to be in his stuff, you know, it was all very exciting. And as someone who loves the ships, and at this time was very big on the Jedi Council forums on the Force.net, the Fleet Junkie thread, as we call it, the sheer excitement in all of our nerdy little heads when we saw that there was going to be an arc all about retrofitting the Mon Calamari, was just salivating over that stuff. And it's, you know, Draven was going to be in it. It was just very exciting. I remember back when Underworld had Channel 1138 as a site. I was writing on that regularly, and I usually just did Resistance stuff week to week, but I did do a review for issue 50 because I was so excited and I had stuff to say about it, because it was, you know, very much an event. And it's double, you know, it's extra long as a, you know, issue as well. But yeah, they definitely made it feel like a culmination. Like even before you get into the arc, you kind of knew this was going to be building stuff, and once you get to it, it brings in Rebels and Rogue One and everything. They made you know, especially in the lead ups, that this would be something sort of firmly. I don't know, was Gillen kind of defining what his run would be?
Yeah. In this one, for sure. And first of all, good to know you do that. I'll see if Ben might be able to dig that up. We can share that review because, yeah, I mean, the site's down and different sites are different iterations of the Underworld site or back and forth. But yeah, I'll ask Ben because he might be able to find it. He might know where that is. Yeah, and the defining Kieron Gillen's run. Yeah, that's a great point. So I guess fast forward to 2023 then. We're reading this now. First of all, I got to make a correction from last week's Tractor Beam, because on last week's Tractor Beam I said this is just weird synergy timing. I said, okay, Dr. Aphra, the latest issue of Dr. Aphra is the first time we see General Leia chronologically. No, apparently at the end of this run, she's promoted to General, and this is the first time she's General Leia Organa, even though throughout the rest of the time it's just Princess. But so that's an interesting little tweak, little wrinkle, I guess, in light of everything happening now in paper canon, and the idea of these great culminating crossover events. Not just crossover. Well, now they're doing crossover events. This wasn't a crossover, but that. I'll say this is a bit eyes on screenish. It's really interesting to see, just for a moment, to see this Twi'lek general be a general in the Rebel Alliance, just integrated and meshed in what's happening with the Alliance, and a future Chancellor from Chandrila. We've gotten, since this arc, we've gotten a lot of Mon Mothma. Of course, we got her in Andor. We're getting her in this show. To see her, this is probably, I think, the most we saw her. From what I can recall, I could be wrong. In a comic book, just seeing Mon Mothma kind of connecting, being Leia's guide, Leia's friend, pulling her aside, taking care of the diplomatic side where Leia goes off and takes care of the military side, if you will. So some things that we're getting now, interesting to go back and to see, okay, that was then, and it has a different feel to it because we're more familiar with these characters now. Joel, what was this like? Sorry, reading it, we've touched on again how you may have read it. What was this like reading it in 2023 with everything that we've had since?
Yeah, I never know if I have different experiences with the newer stuff for sure. With the newer stuff, I did notice Hera though when I first saw that, and I'm like, oh wow, is this the first time Hera's appeared outside of Rebels?
I think she's in other comics, in the After comics, but yeah.
There's a point. Oh yeah, she was on the Lucrehulk, and there is a point in an issue, just a couple issues prior to this, where her and Zeb are in a cafeteria.
Oh, nice.
And that's it.
Oh, okay. Because that was interesting. Because the kind of there was for years before, obviously the current show, kind of a blackout of all Rebels characters, probably because there might have been some knowledge of, we're about to do something really big, so we kind of have to put them on the kibosh. Although Hera got to appear in the Alphabet Squadron trilogy as a main character, so Hera was weirdly kind of the one allowed to have some freedom. But I digress. But no, it's really interesting, kind of looking at just kind of this particular era and just kind of seeing this part of the war kind of seeing the rebellion kind of build up, but then get really squished and then squished again at Hoss. Because it's sort of interesting. I'll kind of get into this later, but yeah, I found that interesting. And it was just cool to see Draven. Seeing Draven, another screen show makes me kind of think of I really hope now he's in Andor season 2. That's kind of my one hope. It's if I have one hope, it's Draven in season 2, because now we're gonna do some bigger things. So it's I hope he just shows up. I want him to have at least something to do, because they've expanded upon like Melchi in season 1. So
True.
kind
Yeah.
of would make even that story even more bittersweet and just kind of cool to just build up that character. And I just like seeing the rebellion kind of at its most organized, where it's like,
Mhm.
okay, we're kind of now more a formal army, sort of, instead of just these scattered cells all over the place, kind of more of a united front in a way. So yeah, that was cool. But yeah, those are just sort of my. I don't think I had like a different view from when I
Sure.
read it the first time, but yeah,
I mean, the rebellion again, in light of last Tuesday's episode, the rebellion being more organized, seeing how Mon Mothma is on its way to being something else, an actual government. So, yeah, on that way, Draven getting more character to do in this, frankly, than even in Rogue One. Maybe about as much. And so, yeah, I'm curious to see if I'd be really interested if Draven there's a more in Endor. There's more of the wrinkle that we see in this. I'm using the word wrinkle a lot. More, yeah, because he's kind of like this one bit. Sort of, I'm the intelligence guy. I'm gonna order the assassination on Galen. I don't care who he is. Let's go. Let's go. Yeah, obviously we'll get to him in a little bit, but more so make more interesting in Andor. Make more. I mean, he serves the story well in Rogue One, but make more interesting. Red, what was this like reading in 2023? You're muted, but
Yeah, yeah. Looking back on it, it's obviously we don't have the same novelty of yay Rogue One being referenced.
Sure.
It is. It's weird thinking back to that time when even shortly after Rogue One, there really wasn't much in the way of tie-in stuff, really, or stuff that was afterwards, kind of building on like as if it was the same universe and everything. So this time it was more like reading it as just an arc of a comic than experiencing that within the fandom. So it definitely feels different, not to its detriment necessarily, but it's definitely a very different experience reading it on its own and as its own story. It definitely feels less impactful in a sense, and I do wonder how much, I guess, did the arc necessarily follow through on its themes, which is something I didn't really feel at the time because of all the excitement and everything, but seeing it in its totality, how much it really played with stuff or how much it sort of just gestured more than anything.
Fair enough. It's interesting how time can change that perspective. Fair enough. I mean, we can also have different perspectives on it because I do thought it held up, but yeah. I mean, maybe that's what you'll say at the end too, but we'll see. I mean, yeah. Well, again, like time changes our perspective on things, so I appreciate that. Joel, let's dive in here. Talk about the state of the rebellion before the arc, and then we'll dive in.
yeah. So this is like I was getting into this earlier, but this is sort of an interesting way to start the arc. The Mon Cala stuff had just happened. This whole Kieron Gillen's run is very much about building up the rebellion and then ultimately crushing it. Well, not truly crushing it, obviously, but what I like is kind of seeing that, which kind of is something built up from Rogue One, a little bit of like, the Rebel Alliance is no longer just these scattered shells that no one really takes seriously. It's like, okay, now we're getting closer to actually being like a major fleet. We're not going to be like as powerful as say like the Separatists ever were, but it's like, okay, we can use this. Like Dodonna said, we can use this fleet to hit tactical targets. Our capabilities are a lot more advanced than they were. There's more dignitaries and allies coming to the rebellion. Obviously, that's sort of something that I've always felt it's always sort of been like in terms of the grander narrative of Star Wars is the first Death Star's destruction is so pivotal because it is the birth of the rebellion truly as a single organized entity, and not just an entity ready to collapse on itself because they're scared and don't know what to do or ready to surrender at any moment's notice. So that was always cool to see. Obviously the stuff with Queen Trios is sort of she getting ready to betray them. I kind of don't remember, like, and obviously I don't remember like from the earlier arcs how we built up to this, but
Yeah. I mean,
like
I'll say the one thing I wanted to point out there is, as I mentioned, so King Lee Char, he's basically being assassinated by the Empire. They want to clamp down and take full control. If you're Mon Calamari, you're gonna have none of that. And so that's where, I mean, that was the big move in the previous arc, is that Admiral Akbar has now joined the fight. And Mon Cala have now joined the fight. We see them. I guess we see them in Empire. We definitely see them in Return of the Jedi. We don't see them in New Hope at all, obviously. And so that's one of the big things that had to happen in the previous arc. They're there, and so that really bolsters the resources and the expertise, and of course the ships, Red, that you're talking about. So that was a big development. Yeah, the point of the build up,
Right.
to some moment that actually is almost as a bait and switch. It's hold on, we thought this would work, but we thought this would be a really great moment, but it turns out Queen Trios has taken us for a spin. So sorry,
yeah, but Red, I'll toss it to you. Kind of, what are your thoughts on like the beginning of the first issue, and like seeing just, as I could say, the state of the rebellion, and kind of, and also if you want to add in like what you kind of how this fits in with like the other stuff, go ahead.
Yeah, at this point, I think I forget if it was Mako Ta, which is what we see here, or if it was a different thing. We had kind of a one-off, or once or twice mentioned Rebel shipyard, like deep in some nebula.
Mm-hmm.
That was the explanation for why we didn't see a bunch of Mon Calamari ships and other stuff. That like they were being retrofitted off screen, and it was very neat to finally get to see that all come to fruition, and also of course the huge amount that was brought in from the mutiny. Because prior to this, we had obviously the Profundity, which was like actively in service, and Home One. Akbar did have Home One. We do see that in what's the episode? Secret Cargo in Rebels over Dantooine. But getting sort of, okay, here's how, we justified pretty effectively how there is that smaller fleet in Rogue One that's more the scattered raider kind of stuff that's all gathered.
Mm-hmm.
And then here we're getting a more uniform fleet. And so you can justify stuff of like, okay, why we have Home One and everything, that might be the first of that stuff. And then that becomes the basis for the later designs that, they mass produce to create all this stuff. I think it was a very smart way to justify that lore-wise.
How would you say, Red? Just, I mean, this is sort of going beyond the comic, but that's what we do. It's called Eye on Canon for a reason.
Yeah.
How would you say, Red? Just overall, the canon up to this point has portrayed the Rebel Alliance in your view, from what you saw, what you read, just in your opinion.
I think there was definitely a lot of emphasis on showcasing them being strapped for significant ships, because that was a thing in Legends where you would have some writers who were really good at that, and then other times, like in the novel Death Star, I think a rebel just comes out of nowhere and attacks the Death Star with a Looper Hulk, and like there's like 1,000 X-wings that get thrown at the Death Star. It's like, oh, there's another battle against the Death Star like an hour before,
right?
And it's just things coming out of nowhere. Force Unleashed I will give I will say is okay, at least with like the limited but cool mixed fleet that we see above Camino.
Mhm.
Even though I don't like lore-wise, that battle, it honestly is pretty similar to Rogue One in like scale.
Right.
And Canon had kept pretty good about that stuff. Even before Rogue One came out, they, stuck with this being, stuff being harder to acquire, or the Rebels focusing more on hit and run stuff. You had those implications of, okay, Home One is out there, but it's being retrofitted, and we have other stuff like that. We have a sense that even the stuff that they do have, they can't use, which not only helps the lore, but also, I think, feels good for the stories. That, like, in Rebels, we get those hints of, hey, there's more than just the 3 CR90s that Bail Organa has with him, but they can't risk using that stuff. They're having to use like an old Pelta class, and then Vader destroys that, and you get the example of, okay, yeah, that's why even the equipment they do have, they have to not use, even if it means losing battles, because they just cannot replace equipment. They have the crews for it. I mean, that's the thing with, way more X-Wing pilots than they have X-Wings in A New Hope. Why there's like 100 pilots when they return with 3 ships. And I think they built on that in a way that made the canon feel more deliberate in a really good way. Made it more rewarding to pay attention and read through stuff that, hey, Rebels is showing even just a fraction and hinting at stuff, but it's scary when you lose one A-Wing squadron. And we know that, that's not the entirety of the stuff, but what is operational versus what exists.
Yeah. Matthew, how will you feel the rebellion's been portrayed up to this point?
So I was gonna say, the thing about this whole arc, and maybe I'm gonna jump ahead to kind of the end. First of all, Andrew, hello there. Thank you for super chat. That's great. Good job. Yeah, this channel hasn't gotten a super chat in a while, so there we go. Good to see you. Andrew, what do you think of Hope Dies? What do you think of the Rebel Alliance leading up to this arc? Right, let us know in the comments. Go for it. Yeah. So one of the interesting thing, Red, you talk about fleet deployments and material resources and assets. The fascinating thing about this arc specifically is that they're able to build all that up, build up the fleet together, but then they can suffer a massive catastrophic loss, and that they can really get their behinds handed to them, and yet they can still stay resilient, and they can still stay together and hopeful together in terms of organizationally, but in terms of their common commitment to the cause, to the Rebel Alliance, to freedom and democracy in the galaxy. And to see that actually continue and carry on through this arc and into after this arc shows, okay, that's what's really come together, is almost the spiritual communal reality of what this Rebel Alliance is meant to be and about. So yeah, that it seems to me the more salient, more pressing reality. Yeah, I mean you can't fight a rebellion without ships, without guns, and without whatever weapons. But it's a question of why, them discovering their why they fight. The thing with Ezra, that Yoda and Ezra keep talking about, why we fight, not just how and with what, but why. This arc especially goes into that, and in a way that has paid off. There's a payoff from the Lee Char arc, for example, and from everything that come before. Again, it's a high watermark for canon, and we'll get to that at the end, because it's able to explore that as well.
Yeah. If now we got the State Rebellion, talk about Queen Trios.
First off, let's just go back to Andrew, just because you have the super chat. Yeah, Hope Dies is fantastic. It was one of the most daring battles in the Galactic Civil War, one that we didn't know about until now. That's also a great point there, Andrew. So thanks for chiming in there. Sergio, go ahead.
Yes, thank you everyone for leaving your super chat. We love it, love it. So Queen Trios, or as I dubbed her in the notes, the anti Leia, and she's one of many in the comics. Leia sort of had a few dark parallels. I know the Charles Soule comics tried to give her one recently, like a
Kira is the big one, right?
Yeah, but this was like the original anti Leia, the Dark Leia parallel from the Vader, from the Vader arc. Which I should have reread because I wonder if 'cause I don't remember much about Queen Trio, sadly. But it's I bad memory, so I always like to keep that before I judge. But yeah, I mean her whole thing is like, yeah, she did this all for the rebellion, to backstab them because she does not want her plan to be a new Alderaan. And that is always sort of the interesting psychological thing about Alderaan. I wish we see more of in stories of, you'd think, oh, you blow up my planet, how dare you, Empire, I'm gonna fight you. I mean, you'd hope that'd be the case. I'd hope it's the reaction, but not always. It's like almost like, oh my god, you blew up my planet. I don't want that to happen to my planet. I'm gonna betray you can go to the Empire. Or, I don't know if this was a Legends thing or a canon thing or just a thing, but I swear there were at least a few people, Alderanians, who were like pissed off at Leia and blame her instead of rightfully.
I feel like it's a Legends thing.
The Empire.
I know canon, they're all banding with her, but
yeah.
Could be wrong.
But yeah. So Queen Trios is very much. This is sort of the start of their rivalry anti-ship, which I forget how it ends. I mean, we don't see Queen Trios anymore, so I assume she's dead. But Red, I'll throw this one to you. What are your thoughts on Queen Trios as sort of a Dark Leia parallel? What do you remember from her from the Vader arc, and just her role in this arc as well?
Yeah, it was the whole Civil War with, what is her planet?
Shuturun.
Yeah. They I never really remember much about that. Civil War, I think I might have jumped in halfway, and that is why. But yeah, her motivation and everything makes perfect sense and is a nice way of showing that, while Leia was correct to Tarkin about, Vader even flashes back to that conversation here, about, the tighter you close your fist, the more systems will slip through your grasp. That there are going to be systems that double down and double down big time. And it's nice to see a consequence of that, of a planet that would otherwise probably be on the Alliance's side, that because of Alderaan is instead firmly against them.
Right.
It in a way kind of goes back to the story in Star Wars Annual 3, which is one of my absolute favorites from New Canon comics, of that character on that junkyard planet who doesn't like Leia very much and is bringing up that, Leia let her planet blow up, essentially, and Leia coming away with this thing of, yeah, I would probably do it again, knowing that Alderaan would be destroyed. I would do the same thing. I did let it blow up, and that sucks. And just seeing the difference in commitment of, like, both clearly love their planets the same, more or less, but Trios is clearly trying to uphold, or she loves her kingdom and the monarchy that she represents. Leia sacrifices not only the monarchy, but her family and everything about it for a cause that is outside of that, outside of herself, even though, like she says in the annual, people call her, hero, princess, monster, traitor. It's just like, they're all true. I say them all to myself every day. And Trios can only really think of herself, not just herself in like a selfish way, but also the royal her kind of thing. She's fixated on maintaining that monarchy. it's nice to have that, the fact that Leia is technically a princess, be reversed in an interesting way, where it's like, yeah, Leia is technically a princess, but everything about her actions is entirely dependent on a cause that's separate from that, and literally costs the monarchy's existence.
Yeah. What annual was that again, Brett? I don't
Annual
remember.
3.
Number 3. So I guess it would have been, would that have been 2017? Probably.
Yes.
Yeah. Makes sense. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of great points about, the way all these anti-Leias, these foils, help us understand Leia's character better, right? Understand her commitment to the cause, like you were saying, at the expense of Alderaan, and saying what Alderaan is. And this is that short run that came out in 2015. Alderaan. I mean, it's not like not Ragnarok, like Asgard, right? Alderaan are the people more than the planet, and the planet, they're interconnected to the planet very clearly. But for the people to continue despite despite the planet being destroyed, right? So yeah, really great point. Just thinking about all those dignitaries assembled for Mon Mothma and Leia to see the Great Dispersal, the Great Hope. Yeah, that we think Trios is one of them. We think she's, or at least they think she's one of them. When all the star systems that flock to their fingers, we have them all slip through the fingers and flock to the rebellion. We have a visualization, the diplomatic effort of moving from a rebellion to a republic again, already underway because of the Death Star. I think in this arc, at some point, Leia saying how the Death Star, it had a part because of that. What I really appreciate then is why we have that B story in the issue number 1 with Vader going to Shu-Torun, saying, kicking it off. I'm glad that they didn't make that a kind of a bait and switch that would have felt cheap. It was only a little bit of a bait and switch in that it was just at the end of the first issue. And so, she was playing them this whole time. We know she's playing them. And really, it brings up, I mean, the way Trios brings up, not so much in our own world, but within Star Wars, there's this thing about royalty and nobility. And there's a little, it's connected to our world, but I don't know any nobles, celebrities. So maybe, a celebrity and the kind of compromises that people do for celebrity, protect their brand, protect their posse, their crew, protect, whatnot. I mean, here's the thing with Trios. I don't entirely blame her. I given literally, Vader's right there. What are you going to do, especially after, like you were saying, with the psychological effect of Alderaan? So, yeah, I seem to remember she gets redeemed eventually. There's some redemption arc eventually. And of course, that's the end of her. But, yeah, I thought it was really effective to show, you talk about, even just make the gender comment a little bit. So Leia breaking the glass ceiling, Trios a little bit breaking the glass floor a little bit, not to the same extent as some other characters. But yeah, it was a really great addition. And again, and one of the things Jolie brought up a few weeks ago, bringing an author or creative, bringing someone in from or character or story in from something they've written previously. Right. I think Shu-Torun comes from the Vader run, Gillen's Vader run. So that was exciting. That was, again, really good use of, I don't want to say fan service, but just bringing this character in. It was really well written, really nuanced, and had layers to her that her interaction with Leia really brings out.
Yeah, it's certainly interesting to see kind of Gillen build off on his Vader run and bring that stuff into the main run, which is always kind of cool what you see, and it's something you see a lot on. Any last remarks on Queen Trios? Red, any remarks?
No, though I did just realize it was Annual 2.
Okay.
Annual 2. Ooh, we'll have to take a look at that
Which is the one with, I guess, the Vader. That's the Vader annual I'm thinking about. Never mind.
Gotcha. We'll have to go back.
Keep going. Go on.
So yeah. So now in my notes, as we talk about this comic very much wants to talk about, Rogue One kind of builds off a lot of that. I mean, the whole Gillen's run is pretty much let's build off kind of the legacy of Rogue One in a lot of ways. And funny
Ashes of Jeddah, right?
Bad Ashes of Jeddah, which was great, and funny enough, this built on something that I remember me and Red were always speculating about because it was the name Rogue within it. Does this have anything to do with Rogue Squadron? And yeah, so this is where Rogue Squadron is officially formed in this battle with Luke and Wedge and the gang. So and it was just cool, kind of seeing even little bits, and this is from the previous stuff too, of Luke kind of realizing, hey, my whole big heroic journey in New Hope was built upon the lives of people I'm never gonna meet. Oh, yep, there it is. There's the scene. There it is.
Also an after Cloak and Dagger, but
ah, dang, that is old.
Sorry, go ahead.
But yeah, Luke kind of realizing, hey, my whole hero's journey thing was built upon the lives of people I'm never gonna meet, who all kind of died, sacrificing themselves, so I can kind of have the big hero moment. Yeah. Which is something that we see a lot of, is like both in real world and sort of and it's obviously the fiction of Star Wars that Luke, Han, and Leia get to be the big heroes because of, in some ways, a lot of nameless faces that the history books aren't gonna probably recognize, sadly, for kind of the worst. Like, who's gonna know? Like, who will? Obviously, this character wasn't probably even invented yet, but it's like, will anyone know who Luthen is? Probably not. He's probably gonna be one of those figures in Star Wars who's like, I mean, obviously we know with the audience, but in terms of like the real world, the in-universe history, it's like, I doubt anyone's gonna have Luthen in like a New Republic history book. Because he's probably, even though he's like probably one of the most important people outside of like Mon Mothma and Saw, is like kind of spearheading this rebellion. But Red, I'll toss it to you. Not only just the formation of Rogue Squadron, but how you felt, and we can talk about the previous arcs as well, like how this builds upon the legacy of Rogue One, both the characters in the Rogue One and the movie, and kind of Luke, Han, and Leia realizing, oh yeah, we get to be heroes because a bunch of people died. So go ahead.
Yeah, I think the reasoning for why it's Rogue Squadron is, in hindsight, very obvious and quite good. It's like, oh yeah, of course, that would be like, if Rogue One is a thing, of course Luke is intentionally referencing it. That makes perfect sense and is a nice tie-in. And so it's nice to have a story do that instead of it just being implied, and have Luke actually learn, like he does during Ashes of Jeddah, about that, and it actually have an effect on him, and that not being just an off-screen source book thing, like it, was kind of worried for a bit that it would be. Yeah, it. I mean, I will say I'm not the biggest fan of the rogue part of this story, of the like 5 minutes of Luke getting an order and then breaking it. Kind of feels a little forced to get the rogue mention. I feel like they could have had the naming thing without any of that. He didn't have to go rogue himself in a moment for kind of a contrived reason for it to be for him to decide, hey, we should name the squadron after them. I feel like just the sacrifice others made could have been enough for that. But then again, that was always a thing I wasn't the biggest fan of with Rogue One itself. Of just, I'm generally not a fan with Star Wars of the characters who, like, oh, there's too much red tape. Admitting this is like Rogue One, it's justified, but it's, I think Star Wars does fall into that trap a bit too much. Maybe we saw that with Hera recently, of just, even when the lore writes it, it makes sense in context, it does become a bit of a trend that I get. It feels a bit authoritarian sometimes.
Right.
Here, I mean, it works. But yeah, it's nice. It's also, of course, Wedge's with Luke throughout this entire arc. It's consistently there. It's nice. I mean, they don't interact too much, but it's nice that Luke's hanging out with his boyfriend. And the ship lives. Because the X-Wings aren't my favorite ship about Rogue Squadron. I'm only half joking. But yeah, I do wish Wedge got more to do, but that is a personal bias thing.
Do you like Wedge? Is he one of your are you a personal favorite?
Kieron Horn was my favorite, but
that's a joke.
Wedge has had way surpassed him. I think the username literally came from, I think, just Wedge or Red Leader just being an easier thing for a username, and then it kind of stuck, and then I got more attached to Wedge, and then now
the circle is now complete.
Yes.
Okay, I want to jump in because, I guess it could be a trend. There's even with the sequel trilogy, right? And then we're seeing again on the streaming show this thing of, bureaucratic kind of, not just bureaucratic, but chain of command mentality that, the lower level whatevers, the pilots don't necessarily take the creative action. I mean, it's very apparent both in Rogue One and in Force Awakens, right? The relationship between Leia and before Jyn and that council, and then Leia and the New Republic, and now again we saw it on Tuesday. I will say though, if there is a moment in this arc that is the great moment in paper canon, or what makes this arc the great moment in paper canon, for me it is this Rogue Squadron form up. It is, yes, this is time for sentiment. It is time for hope, because it isn't so much, it is about saying individual pilots are going to punch through and take the leap of faith to fly at a closed door and see what happens. Again, it's also that the whole Rebel Alliance is the Rogue One. It is Rogue Squadron. They are gone rogue from the Empire, and they are taking on the Empire, fly, even if it feels like flying into a closed door sometimes, and risking getting exploded and whatnot. This is the moment, and this is the moment I've remembered since I read this comic. Some moments just stick with you, and this is one of them.
They go right up close to.
They go right up close. But I'm talking
to saying the make one man feel like 100.
Yeah,
like
exactly,
they very much drive home.
Yeah,
everything Jyn says on Rogue One in Rogue One.
Yeah, exactly. Or Mon Mothma's speech before the big meeting, right? Just even Obi-Wan's holocron, like these great little these moments of inspiration of yes, the circumstances, what chance do we have, what choice, right, is kind of what you're getting at there. This is for Luke to actually take that, and for Luke's own journey and Luke's own hero's journey to take that bull by the horns and say, I'm going to honor the memory of what they did. We're going to honor their gumption and honor their willingness to take the risk and go for it, and also to trust that the generals, the higher ups, that they'll actually, once it turns out, that was the right call. Be able to do that and not be like the Empire and say, oh, you made the right call, but you stood out of line. We're going to swipe you down anyway, which is one of the reasons the Empire falls. Don't forget, is because they're so rigid and they're so based on reputation and honor and taking credit and jockeying, that to see the rebellion be different in this way. It was, just again, Wedge saying this isn't the time for sentiment. And I get where he's come from. It is dire. Star Wars is always about, like I was getting at, even what I was getting at a little bit with the Truth and Reconciliation. When there's the greatest darkness, there's the speck of hope that always stands firm, is always there, even if it's faint, even if it's a faintly burning wick. Um, you know, you have this moment right in the halfway point. It is the end of it's a 6-issue arc. The end of issue number 3 is this moment, and it was just really well led up to, really well timed. Just you feel the tension. That's another thing about this whole arc. It feels very cinematic. It feels like you're watching an animated show, for example. Similar to what Charles Soule is able to do with his comics.
Mhm.
This, really feels like, that's the midpoint of a film, and the thing. Okay, the tide is about to turn. Rogue One form up. So, I appreciate that. Again, it was, and this is a great example of what I was saying off the top, right? Yeah, we know in Empire, there's this thing, this squadron that Luke leads, and it's called Rogue, and Wedge is in it. But how did they start? And it could have been him just sitting around. Could have been just them sitting around and be all, oh yeah, let's throw a nod. Let's do that. Why not? Or some committee deciding, let's throw a nod to those. But no, Kieron Gillen says, let's tell a story that gets at the spirit of what is important about that film and about what Jyn Erso's story is. Even, if she is maybe lost to history to some extent. Luke, who wouldn't be lost to history, we know. He comes upon that name, reflecting on this, but enacting it and jumping in and taking the swing. And, similar to with the Death Star, right? Trusting in the Force, even if it doesn't explicitly talk about the Force. For Luke, obviously, there's the connection to the Force and the way the Force is able to move things towards the light and towards life. And with Jyn, may the Force be with us. Here's Rogue Squadron form up.
And I do, what I like about it also, and just this whole, in the Ash of the Jeddah arc especially, is, Red, you're talking about like how, sometimes feel like two separate universes. And I've talked about that before. If like, I would argue like if you watched Andor and Rogue One, it just feels like a little bit of a separate universe from this comic for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But when these things happen like that, where Luke's kind of like lamenting about Jyn and kind of her sacrifice, it is that thing of that, of like seeing the kind of two universes come together in a sense. Which, Star Wars is multimedia franchise. There's always got to be a little bit. I mean, obviously, all stories got to stand on their own. But it's always cool when that part of it kind of meshes together. And I know I agree. It's like it's like the whole the darn bureaucrats thing that gets a little tiresome after a while.
Especially we want to see. I mean, again, this is the Star Trek versus Star Wars thing. Star Trek, the bureaucrats, especially Discovery Season 4, for example, the bureaucrats actually doing good. We want to see that a little bit more. I think maybe Tuesday we might see that a little bit more with a certain Chancellor, but as opposed to
Captain Kirk, then it's like, I'm away, Captain Kirk.
Yeah.
I will say that was something. I think part of it is The Last Jedi spoiled me. Even though so many people complain about Holdo, I loved everything about Poe's story in that. Of just he does the crazy flyboy epic thing and the cool. They did do this heroic sacrifice. It might have been worth it on a moral level. Tactically, as Leia points out, wasn't. And sometimes, which is the one thing that I think when I was saying about like the theme feeling a little incomplete, I think that really popped up for me with the last issue when Luke's or second to last issue when Luke is talking to Dodonna, and Dodonna has that conversation with him about sacrifice, about like the price you're willing to pay. But it's not just about what you're willing to yourself sacrifice, but the fact that you're sending, you can throw yourself at all these things. It's another thing to send someone else to their death, knowing that's going to happen. And it does feel like I do feel like it's a little sad that Dodonna is the one who dies. And I guess Luke does send him to that, but we don't necessarily get too much of a moment of reflection of Luke getting to feel the consequences of the tough choice or the making the decision that costs other people their lives, that has a backfiring element or something you can't necessarily fix.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I'll
I
just say you're correct when it comes to Poe and Holdo, and that's a great point. That's a great contrast right there. Yeah, in the sequel trilogy, right there. So
here. What did Leia say? Like, no leaders.
Yeah.
Dead heroes or
Just
something. I forget
dead
that one.
heroes,
No
because that's what a
leaders.
hero is apparently.
But speaking about dead leaders,
Mhm.
let's get to him. The reason why I read your one of your favorites. You wrote a whole article about him, General Draven. Yes, this is. I don't remember how much Draven was impacting the other arcs previously. Shows how much I remember. But do you was he? Oh, maybe you
So
remember.
he in issue 35, he's responsible for a mission Han is doing.
Mhm.
I do remember that,
Mhm.
and I forget. I don't. Was he in the Han Solo mini? I don't think so.
No, like the race.
Yeah.
Well, I mean that comes out well before Rogue One, so
Oh yeah, that's
2015.
that's Kraken.
Yeah,
That's right.
yeah.
That's right.
So yeah, no, this is Draven. Yeah, fairly recent.
But
Yeah.
this is General Draven's kind of time to shine,
Mhm.
and die, in a big way. It was cool just to kind of see him kind of get a moment, especially in the post Rogue One world. Slightly gets this is a slight retcon of a Star Wars source book called Rebel Files, where it's kind of hinted that he got to live post Endor.
It's a
There's like
source
a
book, Joel.
I know
Don't
it's
worry
a source
about
book.
it.
I know they're always the first
And it's
to go.
in a series of source books from Legends, because it was the Rebel version of Imperial Handbook, Sith Code, Jedi Path,
Yeah.
which are all great, and literally Jedi Path was the main source of inspiration for Ryan Johnson for The Last Jedi. He talked about that was the thing he kept reading, which it's a damn good book.
Those are some damn good books.
Yeah.
I have a few.
But
Draven gets a moment to shine. I really like. I always feel like this is also this arc in some ways, and even if I can see your point right about like maybe the scene doesn't completely hit home the way it maybe should, of very much a passing of the torch, right? Like we're now in like the third generation of rebel leaders starting to come into their own. Like if the originals were like obviously Saw and maybe Kanan and some of the other ones, and then like maybe like the more second generation when the rebels get a little more as Tony Gilroy likes to put it when he talks about like rebels go corporate. It's like Draven, Dodonna. Funny enough, a lot of them also ex-Imperials, because Dodonna was officer and Draven was intelligence officer.
They're Republic. They're all Clone Wars guys, or Separatists in Cassian's case, technically.
Right.
Sort of, but retcon. But at the time, we thought,
right. Right. And now kind of. This is the era where kind of the golden children, for lack of a better term, the ones you can put on the posters, Luke, Han, and Leia, kind of now get to be leaders. And like even Draven's like final words of like, I would love to kick Queen Trio's butt, but I know you, Leia, will do a better job of it than I ever could. And ultimately that line of like, I always felt bad, or I never liked the fact that Jyn Erso got to be the hero and I get to be the one who's proven wrong. And he's like, he gets to kind of make his last stand, and he knows he's gonna die. He knows he's gonna get Rogue One hallway Vadered, and just like even the artwork where it's like he's like, ooh, that looks painful. Vader's just not joking him; he's breaking his back. That was great. And, I'll even add Dodonna a little bit in here too, of like kind of seeing, which is kind of sad for Dodonna because he actually got to live in Legends. He actually get to live post Endor. So here he dies, and seeing now just the new generation of rebel leaders take over. But Red, I'm gonna toss it to you again. What is it about General Draven, just as the character, that you've always liked? Obviously you read an article about him. And what did you think about him in his comic and kind of his final sacrifice to the rebellion?
I think coming out of Rogue One, Draven was fascinating to me. I think because he was sort of in the wrong, but also someone who is completely understandable, and showed a side of the rebellion that none of this could get anywhere without those, people making those really tough, brutal decisions, and all the intelligence, spying, and killing their own informants like Cassian does. And there is this, other people get to play hero, and you get the Starker stuff. That was, I know, Moving Target, one of the first stories in the new EU, has a character who talks about essentially Cassian before Cassian exists. But he's like those early rebels who did the assassinations and stuff. Those were my heroes. Those were people who grew up on it. It's interesting seeing that dichotomy fully. You get to have a conversation between Leia and Draven, even if it's very brief. Is meaningful and sort of connects not just the old guard dying, but also Leia in particular carrying on a lot of that weight from them, like the making mistakes, and because she let Alderaan burn. That was the whole thing in my article, the stuff from the second annual that was so interesting. I'm trying to find the thing Leia says, but I would rather be a monster that believes in something that would sacrifice everything to make the galaxy better than to be someone gifted who sits on the sidelines and watches as if it has no consequence to them. Rebellion is an idea bigger than any of us. It was to be inspire. Yeah, it was to be inspire. It is to alive. Only as strong. Sorry, I'm trying to read the small print on that.
Yeah.
As its weakest, it's only strong as its weakest link. What matters is that if it survives, that it survives us, that it grows beyond us. Last Jedi, again.
Yeah.
It all goes back to Last Jedi being the greatest film. I'm telling you.
It's a perfect film.
Yep.
Yeah.
I will
grow beyond.
I will die for it. I'm sure today, maybe, but I will fight for it with every breath. Anything less is to make nothing, is to have done nothing. Anything less is for Alderaan to have meant nothing. War makes monsters of all of us, or of us all. There are no easy choices, no easy wins. Which is why I named that article "No Easy Wins," because I think that is the embodiment of Draven as a character. There's always going to be the tough, brutal stuff you have to do, or the sacrifices that he wins, and that's the final confrontation he has with Vader. That, I win, I just had to hold you off, and Vader breaking his neck and saying, "Congratulations."
Yeah.
Which
brutal moment.
Which we should get to, of just Vader throughout this arc being incredible.
Oh yeah.
Gillen showing, without getting into Vader's head at all, without any of the Padme flashbacks. That was the great thing with the Vader run, of all the random moments of
all three Vader runs.
Yeah, when he's talking to Aphra on Geonosis, and for a second it's Ahsoka and stuff like that, all of that, but without any of that, you can see Gillen can still write the most compelling Vader imaginable, even without those tools, even without being in Vader's head or showing flashbacks and stuff. That you could just he's the best Vader writer, probably, other than Lucino.
I forgot about Vader in the comics, so I'm glad you brought him up, because it's we haven't talked about Vader at all.
That's a good point. He's a true villain in this one, as opposed to in other ones where he's sort of an
conflicted.
anti-hero in the rest of them, or at least we're
protagonist.
diving into his character. I mean, you guys know what my opinion on which the best Vader comic is, but yeah, I mean, the Gillen Vader is still pretty fantastic, and this is pretty fantastic. They are what we grow beyond. That is the way of all true masters. That's what you're getting at. Yeah, just handing on the torch. I was thinking about this, and at the top I said, yeah, emotionally, because we follow the emotional arc and emotional thrust of Rogue One. We're with Jyn against Draven. We're with, Jyn not wanting her father to be assassinated, and how that may be the wrong choice. And maybe Draven's being too brash and too quick, but that is part of the reality of a rebellion. That is the reality of what an empire, an evil empire, pushes people to do. Draven and Luthen. It's like Luthen's speech, the speech to the Imperial informant who wants out, right? That kind of just sacrificing your soul, basically. Here, I follow the emotional thrust and say, "Oh, that's nice. It's good that he looks back and says he doesn't want to be remembered as the one who was wrong." Is there a bit of a kind of a redemption or a hope for redemption there? I will say, on the other hand, though, it is symbolic. Talking about passing the torch, what I was saying before of this build-up of the rebellion being, or this transition from it being a rebellion and a seditious espionage terrorist group, which we're cheering for, but they're a terrorist group, to a legitimate government. And Leia represents that transition. And Leia saying, going beyond Draven's instinct to assassinate, because that's just the best call at the time. Say, what if it's a new situation? What if we're in a new situation? What if there is another alternative? Different circumstances present themselves at different times, but also say, yeah, it indicates that this alliance is going beyond just the ragtag, no holds barred, no scruples. Yeah, like you're saying, killing informants, to having to have the moral standards that will more the moral standards we see with the diplomats that will actually say we are better than the empire, we are better than the alternative, and so all these diplomats can come together and actually hope for something better and build something better that Leia is going to be the face of and the poster of, and that everyone keeping through this arc says. So yeah, I thought it was compelling, and it works on both levels, and to say they're both right even if they're contradictory. There's no easy wins, but there are wins, and there are moral wins that can be gained as this alliance moves towards actual victory, moral victory, the support of the galaxy to form a new republic.
And it's telling that Luke will stick with the emotional kind of reaction, like his faith in himself fails and he runs away, while Leia doubles down and goes rogue and forms a terrorist group.
True.
A paramilitary organization, pretty much.
Yeah, it's like she continues all of that, all of those tough lessons, and Luke. I mean, what was that thing Brian said about Luke's arc in The Last Jedi? That it was Luke had decided, or it felt there was a fault in the religion or in his faith when it was a mistake in himself. Yeah. He was taken out on everything about the Jedi's teaching and the light side.
I wondered about that too. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's funny.
I just want to jump in and say, what I'll say there is, to your point with Leia forming the resistance, it's to say that there's then a further new situation that emerges, right? So it's that Leia is able to be flexible and understand at some points, like what we saw last Tuesday, you can actually be within the system. That's the thing we were talking about before. With the it's not all bureaucratic red tape just getting in the way. There's a Ziona, but there's also Mon Mothma. To work with Mothma, 3PO. but when that fails, and Star Wars is primarily about that failing, and that's why there's that through line, right? That we can't trust those institutions ultimately to be out for the good of the galaxy and the good of everybody. That we have to always start afresh. And we have to, like I said, we have to always go rogue sometimes and be creative, be prophetic, to use that term. And so, yeah, I'd say taking up Draven's methods a little bit more, again, with the why in mind. And that's the thing with Draven, is I wonder if Draven, and to some extent Luthen a little bit, when you stop caring about the and start caring about the means and only care about the ends, then you're losing a bit of touch with the ends. I mean, that's a Saw Gerrera, right? I think the story portrays him, whatever you might think about him, the story portrays him as a bit less morally upright, a bit more morally suspect, and not the what George Lucas is trying to get at, right? A bit more the gray Jedi, once you start disconnecting and means and ends, then you get in trouble. But then Leia forming the Resistance, she never loses sight of how the means have to match the ends, and that's what I'm getting at. And so,
right. I mean,
when she's trying to mentor Poe, right? When she's trying to mentor this younger generation, mentoring Rey to have that serenity and that composure to then, make a seditious run against the First Order, but it's the why. And so, maybe Driven here in this moment, he is reconnecting with the why again, and that's what I connected with myself is in that moment of, okay, he is saying, with Jyn, she had the sense of, the good of the galaxy requires, first of all, saying, saving her father, because maybe he has the information with the kyber crystals and what the Death Star is, but also being the hero of going off and fighting anyway. It's again, maybe just like Trios, Draven is a bit of a foil in a different way of bringing out what Leia's contribution is. I mean, that's why it's so great that she's the one on the cover here, and she's the main character of this arc. Just finally discovering that, thinking about that. Oh yeah, she's the main character of this arc.
Yeah.
Red, were you going to say something?
Yeah, it's interesting how obviously they are what we grow beyond, and Ben doesn't grow,
right?
And so Leia, has to move on to Poe as that person, and he makes those mistakes. But unlike Ben, he's able to grow. He is a better person, and he's less fixated on the past. And I mean, let the past die, says the guy who's obsessed with the past and is very clearly invested in keeping it alive in his hatred for it. And Draven is interesting because his protege, dies. His legacy isn't, but he kind of passes that on to Leia in a way, even though he doesn't get, they have that conversation of, I wish we could have had more time to interact and talk. And clearly they both lament that. She would have wanted someone like Draven around to interact with, of those counterbalances to her. And for him, he doesn't mention Cassian, but you have to imagine, he outlived his protege, his like right-hand guy. That's gotta, sting, deeply, especially for a spy who probably doesn't have many people they trust.
That's true.
And so Leia being someone, he has hope, and she is the hope that they send this time. Instead of her receiving hope from Jyn, he's sending Leia to the rest of the resistance, to the rest of the rebellion. She is now the floppy disk.
True. No, she's carrying that's true.
I find it funny. Sure. Just one more thing. I won't dwell on this too much, but I find it funny when we talk about how like when the First Order came to be, Luke bailed and Leia formed basically a terrorist group. It just reminded me, Leia's Anakin's kid. Anakin would totally have done something like that.
Lucas Padme's kid, Leia's Anakin's.
Right. It's like, yep, that's something Anakin totally would do.
One last thing I do want to say after all this discussion, now I really need Draven and Andor. I wanted that mentor relationship. Yeah.
Same. But I guess the last 2 points, the state of the rebellion post the Hope dies. I'll try to turn this and talk a little about Vader, because we did talk about him a little bit, and I kind of forgot he was in the comic. It's weird. It's like there's so many other things. Like, oh yeah, Vader's here too. I do like the ending scene with Vader and the Emperor, and the Emperor's like, did you destroy the rebellion? And Vader's like, we crushed them, Master. Like, you are no hope to us. And Palpatine's kind of like, well, you didn't get all of them, and Vader's like, no, it doesn't matter, Master. They are nothing now. And Palpatine's like, acceptable. It's like
that is satisfactory, I guess.
Satisfactory. That's Palpatine for you. It's like, okay, it's like how little they kind of. I mean, again, it's Palpatine thing. Your overconfidence is your weakness, and Palpatine's pretty confident. Like, yeah, we did it. We crushed the rebels pretty much. They're just gone. And they're not gonna be a threat to me. And in some ways, yeah, the Rebel Alliance as a sort of centralized organization by this point has to scatter. They haven't found Hoth yet. But obviously Mon Mothma's like, okay, Han, Leia, Luke, you're all getting promoted. Commander Solo, General Organa, Commander Skywalker. So then Luke, Han, and Leia are kind of all scattered and going out. But again, as we know, obviously from Return of the Jedi, because they're scattered at least, yeah, they might not be able to do big targets, but the spark of rebellion is still there and alive. Again, to use Last Jedi quotes, we have everything we need. The arc doesn't end as optimistic as Last Jedi did, was we have everything we need. But and I don't think they do have everything they need at the moment. But it is sort of that kind of, as long as there's hope, there's fire. But Red, I'll toss it to you like always. What were your thoughts on just how the arc ended with the state of the rebellion? Obviously, Ben, if you want to talk about Palpatine Vader scene too, go ahead.
Yeah, with Vader, I just realized with the little story at the end of the first issue, everyone is recalling something previous that they learned, or someone who's dead now, a lesson they learned from them, and that Vader gets that with Tarkin. Of like they're holding on to lessons they learned from them, and everyone has these heroic ones, and Vader is thinking about Tarkin and viewing Veers as the person who understands that, with that great scene with Veers saying, no, they're not vermin, they're a weed, and it can bend and everything, and him being correct about that Vader's carrying that understanding from both Tarkin's failure and his successes. Both, and yet Vader, of course, is overcompensating and is overconfident about it in the end. He tried to kill Hope, and it's both from just a moral sense of, no, you can't kill Hope, but also that's not the best plan. It's like war on drugs. Maybe don't declare war on a concept. But you're not.
You can't kill an idea.
Yeah. Palpatine's looking at him like, okay, you killed Hope. Thanks. How many rebels did you kill?
Right.
Like, can I quantify Hope as a can I list that as a killed in action? It's like, yeah, Vader gets to revel in his dark side at the beginning, and in the end, even though he's taking it slow and not actually going directly on the offensive and everything. And in the end, the hero's kind of reveling in hope as the opposite thing. Kind of ends where it began, sort of.
Yeah, it's sort of fun. He's like, how much hope? 2,000 hope? 4,000 hope? Like,
yeah, I mean, it's just thinking again where the character needs to go. He's doubled down even all the more with Luke, right? It's, you can't kill an idea, but you can turn their golden boy against them and say, okay, because this plan fails. And so yeah, like you were saying before, it's really, I mean, it's intriguing how Luke, the Vader Luke, whatever, the father son thing doesn't come up in this arc, because he's there and they're in proximity. Maybe because I'm used to it coming up all the time in other arcs, right, or in other, in other parts of this comic. You know, yeah, even especially even in the comic from Empire, the current run from Empire to Return of the Jedi, especially because that's going to come to a head in Return of the Jedi, comes to a head in a different way in Empire Strikes Back. Vader more desperate to turn against the Emperor, turn against Palpatine, and here he's fumbling. He's like, "Well, we did this, we did that," which we don't usually see with Vader. And it's interesting, right? That in terms of numbers, he did do lots of damage. And this is the point. It isn't that Hope dies, right? The arc is called Hope Dies, but that's a non sequitur, or not a non sequitur. That's not fully accurate. Hope takes a hit, but it lives. And this is what I was getting at before, where this is why I think the real buildup is the quality. The real buildup is qualitative, that they have this conviction, this sense of why they're fighting, and that unites them around a common cause to go forward. And the light side of the Force is bolstering them, is with them. This beautiful poetic nod with Mayordi just taking care of 3PO, the side story taking care of 3PO. The small, simple actions that also foster hope. And so, yeah, yes, the fleet's scattered. Yes, Stodon is dead. Yes, Draven's dead. But that's it. I mean, the fleet needed to scatter. Trios, her betrayal is exposed. These different things that are happening, they're still resilient. They're still there. They're still together, like I said. So that is the state of the rebellion. Adversity. I've said this multiple. I've said before. It's everything through COVID, right? Adversity has a way of pressing what really matters, and pressing what we care about most, and a crisis of excavating just what is there. And I think we've all been there in our own lives. We were there as a society the last 3 years, and we've discovered things that aren't that great, things that are pretty good, and how where we can come together and where we pull each other apart. This betrayal from Trios, this attack, so many losses.
Yeah.
But there's still this conviction, and especially, I mean, just thinking about The Last Jedi, this conviction of what a hero is, and how Mayordi is as much of a hero as Luke, Leia, and Han are. And Leia understanding dead leaders, no heroes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in this case, yes, dead leaders are more important to have real heroes who can actually take care of people and inspire hope and make the creative call, flying headfirst into a closed bay door because you think that's the right call. That's the state of the rebellion at this point. And it's one that carries them through the Empire at its height, and it's one that carries them to the Death Star, the Empire at its height, all the way to Endor and Jakku and beyond.
And I'll just add, there's lots. I'm sure we could be here all day. I don't want to extend the podcast too long, but historically speaking, we've seen in revolutions all over the world, these moments where the regime in power have these big demonstrations, and they do, and the rebel force or the revolutionaries or whoever, they do take a hit, and the rebels, they took a hit. No doubt in my mind, hit they took, and it was not good. But
they are now on their long march, is what you're saying.
It kind of, yeah. They're on their long march. This is their long march. Yeah, but they weren't die. They grew back. They kind of organized and they had to scatter.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, because you can't kill an idea, and Vader can't kill every single rebel, that, and that was kind of the Empire's kind of only idea. It's like we just have to keep going to plant to plant to plant and just keep squishing it. But it's like they can just go, scatter.
Like a rebel.
I know. Red, you want to add anything to that?
Long march. You start out with 65,000 and end with only 8,000 remaining. And yet they win the Civil War, and it's the same thing. You take what you can get, and honestly, the fact it's interesting how the rebels keep talking about hope, but at the end of the day, they are being more practical than Vader. Vader is so fixated on trying to kill Hope that he builds up the rebellion, makes them stronger, all so that he can, revel in crushing them. And even though he crushes a significant amount, they don't end up with as many ships as they almost did, but they do end up with more ships than they did before this plot by Vader. He ends up being so focused on the symbolic that while the symbolism and everything drives the rebels, they're, they have something they're actually fighting for, both symbolically and literally. And so they're focusing on that. They're actually keeping their heads above water and surviving. And so a couple of ships making it out is more of a victory than Vader destroying 60% of a force of ships he gave them. It's not a lot. It's not a overall loss because they still gained, in a way, 40% more ships.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Two thoughts on that. One, it's funny that the idealistic rebels, who, I mean, they are idealistic, they have hopes and dreams, but they're the ones being more practical, while, Vader and the Emperor, well, mostly Vader's kind of going for these big, grander gestures. And also, it's funny, Red, you're mentioning that it's just like a smarter version of what Force Unleashed was trying to do. Where it's like, let's just gather all the rebels and make a fake army. And then that blew up in our faces. This feels like a little bit more that practical, kind of more, I don't know, I just like it better. Than what Force Unleashed was trying to do with, like, Vader's like, gather all my enemies, and then we're going to crush them. And that blew up in his face, Star Killer. Sorry, Matthew, go ahead. You were wanting to say.
No, just say, be more practical because they're dispersing, because they're being organized and smart about it, I guess. Yeah.
But yeah, I guess if that's the say rebellion, let's just go on to the final point here of what makes this a great moment in paper canon. And obviously, Matthew and I have been talking about some of our favorite books, some of our favorite moments. I know, in some ways, this is a subjective question.
It is, for sure.
Like, I know some people aren't fans of the Aftermath book. I like the second and third one myself. I have like some personal preference for it. But I'll just say, for me, what I like about this comic book series overall is maybe it is more of a in the moment situation. Maybe it is kind of more how it connected to the wider Gillen run of this big culminating moment for the rebellion, kind of seeing how, as Reddy would talk about, Vader kind of accidentally built up the rebellion, and even though he gave it a hit, he did give it a hit, don't get me wrong. Ultimately, those ships are going to come back to bite him in the butt and the Emperor's butt on Endor a couple years later. Just kind of seeing, again, the rebellion kind of evolve. And I think retroactively, in a weird way, and to kind of go back to the earlier question, now that I kind of am thinking about it more, kind of, again, seeing the rebellion story from here are the ragtag cells of the partisans and some of the earlier groups that we kind of have run into, then to kind of the first wave of, like, Mon Mothma, Luthen, Draven, Bale, Brea, Organa, obviously. And, now kind of in this comic, seeing that old guard, but kind of more second generation, really, if you consider, like, people like Saul, like G1, kind of, be phased out, well, through death, at least. Not like they want to phase them out. They're not pushing these people aside. They're just kind of like, well, okay, they died. And obviously now Luke, Leia, and Han are now their heirs, and they're just the next generation of rebel leaders, and what they take away from those heroes of the past, those rebels of the past, really, and kind of seeing the rebellion we know continue on until it ultimately climax at Endor. So I think that's why, for me, maybe it is more what's around it than what's in it kind of a situation. Although I did enjoy what's in it, so there's that why I really enjoyed this. But Red, I'll throw to you after this conversation. What is it about this comic that you have enjoyed? and just why does it stick out if it does stick out to you, obviously.
Yeah, I think it's a really big moment for the new EU in connective tissue and being able to tell their own stories. Everything sort of comes together and they are moving forward with arcs with consequences for the main trilogy characters, and not tiptoeing so much. It's there's a confidence in this arc, just from a writing perspective, that really does. It's obvious throughout that there is a change in how they're approaching stuff, and that has definitely continued on afterwards.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So good.
Oh no, I would agree with that, and I think that I think that confidence for the most part has stuck around. Like High Republic's definitely, you can see if you ever read it, you can tell like they are more or less allowed to have a free hand. Obviously, the comics for the most part are doing big things, whether or not those things, whether or not you like those things, they're doing big things. That is a fact. And I think that confidence has very much stuck. At least I think so. But Matthew, go ahead.
Yeah, to somewhat echo some of what you were saying. I mean, first of all, yeah, it is the first, not one of the first, but it's one of the first, one of the clear examples of paper canon telling a significant story that really impacts the screen going forward. Kieron Gillen, of course, extrapolating backwards and extrapolating forwards from everything that Jason Aaron had built up and that he was building up. It's the first, really on its own, saying we can take one of these pillar moments of the rebellion really being consolidated into a real threat to the Empire in the forge of them being decimated, right? That makes this great moment. It's so memorable, and that's really the number one reason for me. It's just I just remember it so well, especially that Rogue Squadron moment, rather, Rogue Squadron format. You just know. I mean, it's like you can kind of feel like it was coming. I remember how I felt reading that issue, and how excited on that final full page reveal, Rogue Squadron format. Yeah, it shows us just especially what comics can do, what Star Wars comics can do, as an engrossing visual medium, an engrossing visual literary medium, and the way it's been able to, especially because these comics so much for the comics is they've given the story within the original trilogy to comics primarily, right? And so those comics have taken that Charles Soule and Kieron Gillen and Alyssa Wong, and Kevin Scott, not so much Kevin Scott, but some others have really taken that, and Greg Pak now taken that and ran with it and said, we're gonna, with the main characters, yes, you have bounty hunters, yes, you have Afra with Alyssa Wong, who are definitely telling their own thing and doing their own thing, and that's going to form up eventually to everything else. But taking with the main characters, using them in ways, always the risk of, do we actually honor who these characters are that George Lucas created, and delving and exploring what they are and telling them, giving them new and exciting and dangerous and stressful and difficult situations for them to show their true colors through. Leia, above all, shows her true colors in this arc. Luke shows his true colors. Han, we forgot to mention Han flying an X-wing. I mean, there's just find the cover to issue number 4.
I remember that. And it's like, oh wow, I forgot that happened. That's always kind of weird to see.
Look at that. You never see. When do you see that? Right? You never see that. So yeah, it again. I mentioned one of the high water marks. And it came 3 years in, and there were plenty of great moments before, plenty of great moments after. Like you said, the confidence to really make this integral part of the Star Wars story, and so Kieron Gillen really knocked it out of the park.
Yeah, I think we've done it, everybody. Thank you, Red, so much for joining us. It was great to have you on.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Fun to be on.
Yeah. And and thanks for everyone in the comments watching, sticking to the end here. 2 hours 14 minutes. It's not bad. 3 people. There we go. Let us know what you thought of the episode tonight. Again, those comment sections aren't going anywhere. Whatever socials, wherever you watch or listen to on, I believe, still on Spotify and Apple Podcasts if I can get them up. But yeah, and in the social medias. First of all, Red, I'll throw it to you. Where, if you would like to be found on the internet, where can they find you? Or if you're writing or wherever. Yeah.
Probably follow Joel on YouTube.
Fair enough.
Or follow Doc Holocron too. He always shows up there.
Okay, that's a good way of putting it. you do show up on Doc's channel quite a bit.
Yes.
With Joel. Yeah, it's you're putting it. Joel, where can they find you on the internet?
You can find me at JID2021. Again, JID2021 on Twitter. You can also find me on, of course, you can follow us at the Ion Cannon Pod, down at link below. But for the most of the time these days, you can find me on Discord at the Star Wars Underworld Discord. We have lots of fun chit chat about various canon ships, all that good stuff. So check me out.
Yeah, and the link is in the description below. Minty Fresh link. Click on that. You'll get into the Discord. Great chats, great conversations over there. You can follow me on Twitter at NAUG485, Instagram and Threads, MNAUG1138, Twitter, Instagram, and Threads at Iron Cannon Pod, EYEONCANONPOD. You can check us out, everything we're able to bring you at New York Comic Con. If there's a deal in place, then yeah, I'll go ahead and show whatever I want. If not, then I'll try and keep it to paper, to things that aren't struck. But yeah, definitely keep an eye on us on this channel here on the Underworld channel for content. Everything we do, we bring you at New York Comic Con. And of course, Tractor Beam this Thursday. Maybe not so much. I don't know about the next Thursday because we'll be at the con. Chris and I'll be at the con. But maybe we'll see. Might find a nook and cranny just to record a thing. Maybe not quite at 12:15, but this Thursday definitely 12:15 Eastern time, 9:15 a.m. Pacific. Bring your lunch, bring your comics, bring your breakfast, bring your comics. We'll chat about Bounty Hunters number 39, Vader number 30, 39 or whatever it is. That's been going great. Thinking about where that podcast is going to go. Definitely want to take it in some direction, and we'll definitely be sure to let you know what that is all about. But for now, gonna keep it on with the Ion Cannon branding and Ion Cannon and the Underworld channel, and right here. That's the thing, is one-stop shop. Star Wars Underworld YouTube channel, Underworld Facebook, Underworld Twitter, Ion Cannon Twitch, Ion Cannon Twitter. You can always catch us Ion Cannon Spotify and Apple Podcast feeds. Next week, again, we're trying to sort out what we do, because I'll be in New York City. I think Chris and I might meet up and do a bit of a New York Comic Con preview. So check us out for that. Keep an eye out for that. Keep an eye on for that. And then just I'll keep an eye out for everything from New York Comic Con, from the Big Apple, as they like to say. But until then, Red, Joel, let's blow this thing and head home.